Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Very good turnout. Now, mention the N word to anyone, and they sort of break out in a cold sweat and, really start worrying about networking. And the problem, I think, with networking, or that word, is that it has a really bad image. I think some of these images, very cliched, businessmen going to special meetings with hats and jackets and special buttons, or the proverbial long lunch at the golf club. And that's sort of our current thinking about networking. And of course, that was sort of 30 or 50 years ago, where you actually used networking to climb the corporate ladder. And it was very sort of elitist, and nobody was collaborating or sharing. It was very much for personal gain. But if we fast forward to today, really, I think networking is recognised as a very critical part of career advancement. But I'd like to talk today about, well, my personal view. It's not only important for your career, but I also think it's a very good skill to have in life. Because really, networking stretches way beyond finding your next job. It can be a real source of inspiration if you're connecting and learning from others and people that you wouldn't normally encounter. So I think too, we need to open our mind. Not only might we find our next mentor or role model, but heaven forbid, we may even find a friend. So I think networking, if you look it up or Google it, there's a million different definitions, but to me it's really about creating and maintaining relationships, and that's predominantly what I would like to talk about today. Obviously you're all motivated and want to learn more about this topic, but I think there's a lot of people who think, why should I even be bothered with this whole idea? You know, I'm doing my job well, I'm well educated, I'm being promoted at work, let's just keep head down and tail up, so to speak. And that's certainly a very good strategy, and it has worked for a lot of people. But today, I guess I wanted to just point out that you may be disappointed along the way because you may miss out on some great opportunities. And I'm going to talk about career advancement, but then also touch on just being the first with the news within your organisation and the value that that can bring to both yourself and your company. And also, of course, what it's all about in business anyway, which is winning new business. So let's talk about fast-tracking your career. I just spoke with the gentleman from eWorld Daily before, and I mean, if you talk to anyone in recruitment or HR, obviously social media is now a critical way for people to find talent. And there's a million different statistics out there, but one of them said 90%, but isn't 75% of statistics made up, or 75.3%? But social media is obviously used as an important tool in finding people. So obviously it's important that you are somehow in that research trail that they find. So that's one basic reason to have yourself on social media. But of course, one of the most important parts of recruitment is this passive market, as the recruiters talk about in their secret meetings, is that the candidates who aren't actually active on the market, who haven't applied for the jobs that are advertised, are those that are most valued. So if you aren't somewhere in the universe, and that universe is predominantly online, nobody's going to be able to find you. And I think that's something that's very important if you want to get ahead. So I wanted to give you an example that just happened this week for me, and to give a personal story about how I guess the headhunting game works for me. I was contacted by a recruiter this week for a job, very senior job in the high 200,000s. Well, I would have been happy to take that salary. I don't know about everyone else here in the room. For the head of a digital marketplace. And like many other people who are probably approached like this, I guess I'm lucky. I've been in the game for 15 years. I sort of have 5,000 connections or something on LinkedIn. Now I'm part of the Procurious community, which was 12,000 people. And of course, through all my meetings over those 15 years, I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of great people. So how does one's mind work when you get the call from the headhunter? Well, of course, you immediately think, right, who's a standout and who immediately springs to mind, and you get a few names. But then you go to your social networks. That's what I do, because that's probably the best repository of who I've met over the years. And of course, who's first going to come to mind is not the person that I met 10 or 15 years ago when e-marketplaces were all the rage, but it's going to be the person that I saw post on LinkedIn or Procurious that morning. I guess it's just human nature that if you see something, it is the first to recall. So I guess that's the first sort of lesson. So when I then started going through my network, I thought, right, well, there's some certain skills, some sort of companies I think that'd work on. But because there's so many people in that network, I had to really be a bit ruthless and apply some sort of methodology. And I guess you might be a bit shocked to say, but there were a lot of people that didn't make the list from these simple social media rules. One of which is the easiest, and I am going to elaborate a little bit on this today, is a profile picture. If someone doesn't have a profile picture, I guess it raises a lot of questions for me. One is, well, why aren't they just being a little bit more transparent, or don't they know how to upload? And I didn't before I found my millennial mentor, I've got to admit. So that was the first one. People who have limited connections. There's a lot of people before I come to these conferences that I look up and they've got 49 LinkedIn connections, 143. I'm sorry, but if someone doesn't have 500 connections, they don't rate with me. And I know that sounds scary, but I just think, how could any senior procurement professional not have been connected with 500 people? I mean, it's just beyond. Even just connecting with people in your own organisation should take it to at least 200. Then you have the suppliers you've met, and it doesn't have to be the sales rep, but what about the managing director of your suppliers? You should be connecting in with them, or the head of research at your suppliers. You should definitely see what they're posting. And then, of course, all the market research you do in the outreach. So for me, and I know that a lot of people will be a bit horrified, I really don't think that if you have under 500 connections that you're really out there and have a network, basically, which is, I think, an important part, and I'll elaborate a bit more on that. The other thing I do is Google people. Now, not everyone speaks at conferences, not everyone publishes posts, but you would hope that someone's name would have been mentioned somewhere along the line, even speaking at a company conference or even on their website. So that's sort of the process that I personally go through, and I think other senior executives will, and I imagine for sure that the recruiters will do that sort of process. So why would I do that? Why do I go to that? Well, because of course, if someone's recommending you to another employer, which, as we said earlier, is how most of the recruitment happens, I'm putting my personal brand forward. And if I'm putting my personal brand forward, I want to be recommending people that I know are connected, maintaining their networks, and are in, as I call, the flow of information. Last week, AT&T's CEO came out and said, if people aren't doing 5 hours of online training each week, they're going to fall behind. It's because the rate of information at the moment is so intense. And I mean, in a way, it's a fantastic opportunity for us to stay across everything. But it's almost like drinking water out of a fire hose, isn't it? I mean, there's so much information. But if you cut yourself off totally from the fire hose, then I'm afraid that you might get a little dehydrated. So it's important, from what I've said, I believe, to really update your online profiles and make sure that you've got a great photo, that you've got your recent history. Even if there's not a lot of detail, at least show them the fantastic companies that you've worked for and your education, and make sure you connect with 500 people. At Procurious, our aim is to change the face of procurement. So I don't know how many of you have been online, but we've tried very hard to make it a very fresh, dynamic-looking community, and that's one of our objectives. We think there's a lot of outdated images of procurement out there. The old brown cardigan brigade comes to mind. So for us, it's really part of our mission that we want as many people looking as fantastic in procurement as they can, because there's this cumulative effect as well. it's not just about you and your career. The more that there are positive stories about procurement out there, if you think the recruiters are looking, what about the business analysts who are looking at companies and what different professions are doing? If we're out there sharing our story and promoting the great things procurement does, then it'll have a cumulative effect for the whole profession. Now, I am going to elaborate on the profile picture. It does sound very boring for me to be talking about photographs, but the team did stress to me that we do have some scary photographs on Procurious and that this was a very important point for me to make. So I always listen to the team. So here are some photographs of myself. Not to leave this room, the top left is a selfie in a bar at 12:35 at night. I don't think I'm looking too bad there actually, but yeah, so that's the old selfie. Not too bad, but the face isn't right in the centre and you shouldn't have a selfie. The bottom right's my Facebook photo, which is totally private. I've only got about 30 Facebook friends and it's mainly to keep in contact with my family in Australia. And the other two are professional photos. And I think that's the point. You really have to make sure that your headshot is a headshot, that people can see you for who you are, and that it is a very professional image. We don't want selfies, we don't want wedding photos, no hazy screens or bedroom eyes, favourite cars or children. As I said, you laugh, but there are a lot of crazy things out there on the web. But I think an action shot of you working or doing something is great, but they're hard photos to get. So just a nice, clean headshot. So enough with the photos already, and certainly photos of me. As I said earlier, I think one of the big benefits of being part of an open network is that you open yourself to new sources of information. And I don't know if any of you, probably it's a supply chain theory, but closed networks and open networks could be one analogy. But obviously, most of us spend our lives in closed networks. If you're part of a religion, if you're part of a company, you're part of any community, it's a closed network. And as we know, that's a very comfortable place to be. Everyone has their modes of working. You've got shortcut language. Very nice place to be. But it does sort of promote groupthink and you are limited with the options. Obviously, when you push yourself into an open network, you're open to a diverse range of views. And we had a big debate with Procurious because I wanted it to be a closed network because I only wanted procurement professionals. I only wanted them to be qualified. I didn't want any recruiters in there. I didn't want any salespeople in there. And my team really talked me out of it, and I'm really glad they did because really it is predominantly a procurement community, but people who are sharing, and if we didn't have the diverse opinions of the people in the community, it wouldn't be as rich as what it is today. So I think that's very important. I think too, with this breaking news point, a very important part of your career, I think, or to be seen to be adding value, is to come in of a morning and have something new to share. It's that old elevator moment when you walk in and you've been out taking the selfies till 1 o'clock in the morning and you're in the lift with the CEO. So what are you going to say? And I think that's one of the things that we think is value for a quick browse through social media of the morning. You at least know what the breaking news is. And although everyone in the procurement community might know this news, you may be the first in your organisation. So, you know, when the bomb blast in the Chinese port, obviously that had a big influence on a lot of people. When the rivers flooded in Thailand, you know, that wiped out a whole supply chain. And I guess what we're hoping is that we want this online community to be something that actually is a great resource for people. Supply chain disruptions is one of the biggest concerns for CEOs and obviously for our profession. And obviously if there's a huge flood in Thailand that wipes out your whole supply base, it's difficult to hop on a plane and get to Thailand and check it out. We're hoping that people will go to Procurious, say, look, I've had this issue. Does anyone know what's happening? Does anyone have alternate supplies? You can get information. And I think the more that we get used to going to a community like this, the more we'll build a reflex and a muscle so that we'll come to rely on this community and support each other. Because let's face it, procurement is a fairly lonely place for a lot of people because you can be the only category manager in your company, maybe in your industry, in a continent. And it was a real light bulb moment for me once we were running a workshop and this guy finished the day, said, I can't believe that there's other people in the world that do procurement savings databases. And it was such a great day for him to be together with people that did the same thing as him. And I think this gives you the opportunity to connect with people that are buying the same thing as you or in the same industry. And the proof's in the pudding. We've literally had thousands of questions asked on Procurious and thousands of answers. So people are really willing to chip in and provide rich answers, which is really what we're hoping. It'll be a great resource for the profession. Ultimately, the objective of most networking is to find new business and to generate some sort of commercial value out of the networks that you've made. I'd now like to share an example of my business of how I've actually, from one networking meeting, actually turned it into at least $1 million, but probably a couple. I'd like to stress that was over a 10-year period, but it sounds very good, doesn't it? So basically, about 10 years ago in Australia, I met with this really inspirational CPO, a guy called Nick Moen. He was the head of procurement for BP in Australia and New Zealand. Now, I don't think I ever successfully got Nick to be an official client, but he was probably one of the biggest influences on what I did with my company and probably still doing today. So Nick and I just used to meet up for coffee about every 4 to 6 weeks, and we'd talk about procurement, we'd talk about where it was going, developing the profession, leadership issues, and there was a real exchange of information. And he really inspired me to start our roundtable program in Australia, which has been running now for 8 years. We've had 50 large companies through there benchmarking, so that was a huge development from that in itself. One meeting, Nick suggested that I reach out to Jimmy Ankle-Staria, who runs this amazing should-cost modelling program out of San Diego, but he came to Australia, so we've had a relationship with Jimmy for about 7 years. Then Jimmy recommended a lovely man called Jean-Francois Baril. I don't know if anyone knows Jean-Francois, but he used to be the CPO of Nokia, and he came out to be a speaker at our conference, and we formed a great relationship. Fast forward a few more years, and Jean-Francois introduced us to his son, Mathieu. I don't know if Mathieu made it here, but Mathieu then built all the e-learning platforms for Procurious and ended up going to Australia and living in my home for 3 months while he built that, just to save some money on the project. I wasn't living there. So then fast forward again, and Jean-Francois recommends Eva Wimmers, who was the former CPO at Deutsche Telekom. And she came out to Australia and helped one of our clients. And it goes on. I met someone who, we started an executive program, then we met the woman who runs that. She does a CPO. So you can see that out of this one meeting, which was really a connection that we made and cared about leadership and the development of the profession, all these other benefits came. And I think the other point here is it wasn't just Nick and I that benefited, but hundreds of people have benefited through the training and the learning and the connections that have been made through that relationship. So, next time, hopefully, that you're asked out for a coffee meeting, you'll think, hey, this could be something. But I guess I've tried to share with you what I think are the benefits of networking, and I thought it might be worthwhile for me to share some of my fundamental beliefs about networking. And the first thing for me is that it has to be from the heart. And when I say the heart, I'm talking about authenticity, and I'm also talking about you have to care more about what the other person gets out of the connection than you do for yourself. So for me, that's something really important, and I've spent a lot of my working life, trying to help other people, and by some great outcome, I've managed to do well too. So I think that, if you can come from that perspective, then your networking will always be coming from the right place. And there's been a lot of research that says, basically, and there's no rocket science in this, is that, if you give and help others, you're going to have a higher level of satisfaction. And if you ask other people for help, their self-esteem is really enhanced because they feel like they're valued. So I guess my question is, if the person asking the questions is benefiting and the person answering the questions is benefiting, what's stopping us from asking more questions? And I think what's stopping us from making a lot of these connections is fear. Probably a bit like when we used to date, fear of rejection or fear of the unknown. So I think that's the number one thing that we probably have to get over with networking and understanding why we're doing it, but also come over that fear. And one of the things that can help you with that fear is to understand that it's a two-way street, is that if you turn up to a cocktail party or you're on Procurious or on a social network, the other people there are to network as well. So you're both there for the same reason, and therefore, it should be quite a good mutual exchange. The other thing is a philosophy for me, and you might laugh at this, is that, networking is both formal and social, or formal and informal. I had a joke that I went to one of my boys' kindergarten party one night, obviously in Australia, and I managed to pick up another major client. That was a $1 million client that we worked with for a year at a kindergarten party. So my point is that even when you're off duty, and she's also a good friend now, so even if you're off duty, there are opportunities to network and to learn about other people. But I think too, with this whole boom of online, there's questions about, well, can I have a great network that's just online, or do I still have to come to these conferences and meet people and cocktail parties? And I'm a huge believer that you need to do both, because there's no replacing the face-to-face connection, because that's where you find out what people's aspirations are, what their motivations are. You find out if your personalities connect, because I think I've learned over time that unless your personalities connect, you're really not going to create that magic that you need to have the productive relationships. So what do I use online for? Definitely expanding my network. And I think the benefit of online with these profiles that the platforms have is that you can almost pre-qualify your contacts, can't you? You can see, what do we have in common? For me, it's easy. If you work in procurement, we've got a lot in common. But what school you went to, which companies you've worked for, you can quickly look through that and see where the connection points are. In the offline world, you'd have to probably meet someone 3 or 4 times before you found out where the crossover points were between the two of you. So I think online helps you speed date, accelerate, fast track that whole getting to know you phase. I also think online's got a very powerful role in keeping you connected with your network. So obviously if you've got 5,000 people in your network, or if they're in Australia or China, it's not convenient to meet up with a coffee on a regular basis. So for you to be able to post, to share information, to direct message them or email, just make sure that you're top of mind for them and in the loop when, particularly when they're looking to recommend someone for a new job or they need some help. Another fundamental belief of mine is that it's okay to have all these networks, but if you can't connect the dots, that is, if you can't sort of turn it into some sort of commercial value, then you're sort of missing a great opportunity. So a lot of people have a lot of connections, a lot of people in their database maybe, but they don't really know how to connect the dots. And I think Steve Jobs said, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You have to move through your life and sort of look back, and then you can connect the dots. And I think that's an important thing to understand when you're networking is you'll meet people, you'll connect with them, in an emotional sense, but how they actually play out and what role they're going to play in your future, you really don't know. I think the most important thing is that you find that personal connection and have something in common, and then let the relationship play out a little bit. So I think that's a really important thing to think about is how are you using your network? And the word using sounds terrible, but how are you giving back to your network and providing value to others? So you can see for these reasons and so many more, I really believe in the power of networking. And I think that is why we started Procurious. A lot of professionals still tell me they don't believe in the N word, And a lot of CPOs tell me they don't accept a lot of LinkedIn invitations. So you can imagine how hard, after what I've shared today, I find it really difficult to understand. And after all, who wouldn't want to connect with me? So apparently, I mean, the numbers vary, but there's like 3.5 or 4 million procurement professionals in the world. And when you think about it, I sort of started thinking, well, there's 100,000 in ISM, there's 100,000 members of SIPs, well, there's 200, and there'd be a lot in government, and there'd be a lot in the consultancies, but it's really hard to get to 3.5 or 4 million. You always think China, there must be a lot in China. But I think the point is that there's a lot of people in procurement who are alone in the world, and they're very isolated, and they're not aware that there's this whole body of knowledge and 3 million other procurement professionals out there that can help them. And what we're trying to do at Procurious is connect everyone and help them learn from each other. So I think there's so many problems we can solve together. There's so much we can do to promote our own careers and the profession. If only we use the power of connection and leveraged our network, I don't think there's much that we can't achieve. So Procurious offers the promise that if you get involved, you will get ahead. So thank you. Any questions? Just on that point, I think another important thing for procurement is that social media is going to become part of everything we do. I'm sure your suppliers are already coming to you showing, SRM type products that are based on social media or inventory management. Social is going to be part of every bit of technology, I think, and predominantly what procurement professionals are going to be buying is technology. It's not about buildings now, it's about the technology that runs the building. It's not about mining trucks, it's about the technology that runs the mining trucks. So more and more we're going to be buying technology. So I think the more savvy we can be with all of this, and particularly staying across the rate of change is important. Well, for Procurious, we've only got 12,000 members and there's 3.5 million professionals, so there's still a lot of room for growth. But we're going to be very community-led. We haven't had a big ad campaign or anything major. Because I believe it's got to be a credible community. It's got to be based on knowledge sharing and just be credible. So I think we've proved that now. We've been operating for 18 months. I feel like we've got good feedback from the community. So we'll really be community-led. We're running a corporate pilot this year. So you can basically have Procurious for your organisation. The value of that is many CPOs, global CPOs, might have 2,000 people reporting to them, but they really don't know who they are or where they're located or what their skill sets are. So they've got the same problem as, say, a headhunter when an assignment comes up in Chile and they need someone for 3 months. How do you find the person? So the profiles and having internal group discussions. So that's probably the next thing for us is the corporate thing. But, technology is going to move very quickly, and our challenge will be to keep up with that as well. Any other questions? Concerns. What did you think about the 500 connections? I was trying to provoke you all there. Because I know a lot of people have said, I do not want to connect with my suppliers. I don't want to connect with salespeople. But obviously I'm not in your position. But okay, so I couldn't agree more, but I think you should have 500 high-quality ones. And I think for me, I've only been in Europe for 3 years, and so I definitely know most of the CPOs in Australia, in Southeast Asia. So trying to connect when you're a new person and they go, who is this crackpot? I understand that, but if I'm trying to invite you to talk at the Big Ideas Summit that only has 50 people and maybe only 10 CPOs, you might want to get that invitation. So that's just one example. But who else is trying to reach out to you and they can't get your email? Oh, poor old Caleb, he's got the job. I said, come on, Caleb, you've got to find some way to connect, but you've got to go through the switchboard or what have you. And people may give up. They might say, well, the head of Tesco, I can't get through them, but I'll go to Sainsbury. I can't get into J&J, so I'll go to AstraZeneca. They've got the same sort of background. I'll ring them. Because literally, if you can't connect with someone, you can't connect. You can't get through the switchboard. So it's just a decision, and it's all benefit versus the pain of having every man and his dog contact you, I guess. Well, that's right, and I think you can hopefully build your credibility. You know, what we're trying to do through social media is say, look, we actually do understand procurement. We've been working this for a long time. We understand the issues. So it's not somebody just contacting you and you can all do the same. It's a great way to share to promote your own personal credibility. But also as a leader, I think in large global organisations, communication and change management, that's what global CPOs get paid for. They don't, they cut a few big glamorous deals now and then, but essentially their job is to get the right people on the bus and get them heading in the right direction. So a lot of what a great CPO can do is change and get the culture right and get people heading in the right direction. What better than a 24/7, 365-day communication channel to reinforce to people what you're on about? So in procurement, we go through these different cycles. It's always cost down, but it's innovation, or it's corporate social responsibility, or it's something else. If you are continually as a leader posting notes about innovation and look at this, look at that, people will soon get the message. He is about innovation, or she is about safety. Do you know, here's my safety share for today, or whatever. It's a perfect way to keep reinforcing the message. And I think with the private networks that we'll develop on Procurious, people can ask questions and you can respond immediately. You don't have to wait for your next world tour to explain why the company's going in this direction or what have you. You can do a day-by-day little guiding people, keeping them on track, and addressing any misconceptions as well. So I think as a change management leadership tool, social media is very important too. Okay, I get that asked a lot. Funnily enough, I'm just doing it for the love of it, but I have been for the last 18 months. But essentially, we've got advertisers, but that's not enough to keep the doors open. So our main revenue stream will be corporate subscriptions at this point. But obviously the value of the community as well, the more members we have, the more engaged people are too, the value of the company will increase. So I've got a picture of a yacht on my wall, but there's a small one and there's a big one. But no, but that's the plan. But I mean, this has been a long-term dream of mine. I've believed in getting procurement people together my whole career, and I think this technology just allows us to do it. And really, you don't know with these things where they're going to end up, but you've got to be led by your customer and the community and what have you. Exactly. Or, I met with the gentleman yesterday about his, very analytical reports. He's like an analyst for different technology products and what have you, and so we could do a deal with him and people get a discounted rate and have that information streamed to their private community. We could do skills assessments on there. We've got the e-learning. You could have your own private e-learning. We could benchmark your people against everyone else that's on there. But what I want to do is once we have the pilot and it's working, is to get together a group of CPOs and they can design the next module, 1.0, 2.0, and once again, make sure it's customer-led and it's meeting their needs, and that there's not other products out there that can do it better. Yes, so Ewan, who is downstairs as one of the doctors in the clinic, he is our content manager. So he is writing a lot, but we really hope that we won't be writing that much soon, because I think a lot of the rest of the procurement community, well, the suppliers and the consultants were very wary of us, obviously, and didn't really want to share. But, I mean, we're going to great lengths to say this is an open community. And I think, too, you worry about consultants, and I am a consultant, getting on there. But actually, a lot of these companies do produce really good information that is really great for our community. So, when Deloitte's published their CPO study, that's something everyone wants to read. Or, even the technology houses. So if we can encourage them to post it all on Procurious, and of course you'll download it and you'll have to give your email address, but at least it's in one spot. And I think it's a great marketing platform for anyone who is providing the profession as well. So, And we have a reporting mechanism as well if there's anything that you're not happy with. Okay, well, thank you all so much. I've got some business cards here, but you know where to find us.